Good Sunday afternoon. This is Nicole from Pillow Talk Pretty Things, and we are on IntellectualRadio.com. And today we are focusing on talking about resources and talking about domestic violence, as it is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we hope that you're tuning in, and please share this broadcast because you never know who you may be helping in the long run. So I have some wonderful, wonderful experts in the field who have joined me today, and so I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and to say who they are, what their role is, and then we will start with our discussion for tonight's broadcast. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Tiffany Brown. I own a private practice on 85th and Stony Island in Chicago. It is called Family First Domestic and Family Counseling Clinic, and we focus on forensic mental health, which involves dementia as well.
Hi there, my name is Lauren Pagan. I'm the Director of Domestic Violence Advocacy at Pillars Community Health Constance Morris House. We are a local domestic violence program and shelter.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yesenia Maldonado. I'm the Executive Director of Between Friends, and we are an organization dedicated to the prevention of domestic violence. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Rosado, and I'm the Direct Service Volunteer and Education Coordinator at Connections for Abused Women and Their Children.
I'm Chuck Dom. I'm a Catholic priest that works in the Archdiocese of Chicago, promoting domestic violence outreach. So reaching out to parishes so that they are informed and can respond to victims in their congregations.
Great. So obviously, as you can tell, we have a lot of expert knowledge that is with us today, and so we're very excited about that. So the panelists before today's show also given a set of questions for discussion, and if we go off the set of questions, that's perfectly fine. If you have something else that you want to share or chime in with, that's great, because the more information that we put out there, the better. And there may be things that I don't know about that we should be talking about. So this is really like more of a free forum, free discussion, and it's obviously a safe space for all of us. That's okay. So one of the first questions that I did want my panelists to discuss related to the resources that are available via their various organizations or their practices. So that if there is a victim or a survivor that is looking for help, what type of help and services can they get from you? And I think it's important to also note that we talk a lot about victims, and victims do need resources, but the real trauma and the real work actually begins after you leave, to be honest. That's speaking from the perspective of a survivor, because that trauma remains with you until you actually deal with it and navigate your way through the trauma. So survivors need a lot of resources as well, because I know I spent many years just pretending things didn't happen or kind of trying to forget about it and putting it back in the recesses of my mind until I would be triggered with something. So I think that even looking from the lens of like how survivors can be helped is really important in your discussion and what you share out. So we don't have to go in any particular order, but just kind of talk about like what resources you provide and how that helps victims and survivors, or even family members who have victims or survivors that are close to them or close friends. So we'll just kind of open it up and anyone can chime in as they will. Feel free. But don't all go at once, I guess.
That's the trick.
Well, I'll go ahead and start us off. I think probably first and foremost, what I want to make sure that folks have in terms of understanding and resources is understanding that there are, I think all of us operate many hours of crisis line services and a line that will answer questions, really offer support. Confidentiality is key to all of the lines that we operate. Ours is 1-800-603-HELP.
Can you say it one more time?
Sure. It's 1-800-603-HELP or 4357. And I think the more that we get numbers out there, let people know that resources are available. And there's always going to be someone that answers that line that is able to offer support, offer the best resources that might be available. Maybe you don't live in the Rogers Park community or in the Hyde Park community or in a community where we are. We want to make sure that we get you connected to a place that is the most convenient to you. And I think also the most important thing is that understanding that healing is a journey and that everybody enters it at a different point in time, and sometimes questioning whether your relationship is in fact harmful or not. And you get to define that. And you just want to find a place that's non-judgmental, confidential, and also offers the services that you most need at that point in time.
And I like what you said, the part about that healing is really a journey. Because I think one of the misnomers about domestic violence and being a victim is that like all of a sudden something magical is going to happen and you're just going to, that's going to be it. And you're just going to decide to leave and that's it. Or that once you leave, everything is going to be super kosher and everything's going to be great. But that's really not, in fact, the case. Like everything that you do, if you're a victim or survivor, is really a step-by-step process. And you can't be hard on yourself in that process, because I think a lot of times, like even as a victim, sometimes in that process, you go back and then you leave again and then you go back. So it's really all about what steps you're taking to make yourself whole and to heal. So I really thought that was really important about the piece about it being a journey. Definitely it's important.
Yeah, and sort of following up on that, I know you talked a lot about it's not just an easy process to leave. We know that it takes a survivor an average of 7 times to leave an abusive relationship.
7 times.
7 times, absolutely.
That's incredible. Now, see, I didn't know that statistic. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely really eye-opening. And so what I think is important about our services and probably most of the domestic violence providers are you don't have to be out of your relationship. You don't have to be recently out of your relationship in order to get services.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, of course. If it's an emergency, for counseling, we have people who have been out of their relationships for 15 years. Mm-hmm. We have people who are considering leaving their relationships, or we have people who are staying in our emergency shelter who have just left, because it is a process and it is a journey.
Mm-hmm. So just to kind of piggyback off of what you said, I think just the concept of this idea that it typically takes 7 times to really decide that you're leaving. And I think the reason why that's so important is for people who are outside of the realm of victims and survivors, because people always say, well, why don't you just leave? Or, that sort of thing. Not realizing that person may have tried to leave already and because of various reasons have gone back. So don't necessarily assume as, for a victim that they don't care and they want to be there, because you're attempting to leave on so many different things, will bring you back. So I think that's so important, just so that people can have empathy and understanding of what it's like to be in that situation, because you really don't understand unless you've been in that situation. Right. It's very difficult to understand.
And I think also I have to put my prevention hat on there for a second. I think as a community and as a society, we ask the wrong question.
Absolutely.
We're asking always, why does someone leave? Mm-hmm. Or why don't they leave? Or when are they going to leave? And we're forgetting to ask the question of why is someone harming and choosing to harm someone else that they claim to love?
Absolutely.
And if we start asking that question and we start looking at that as a form of accountability, and again, accountability also takes many different forms for people. When we start asking that question, that's when we're going to get to the root cause of this issue. Mm-hmm. Because if we keep asking why someone doesn't leave, it doesn't change the dynamic that they were harmed.
Right, exactly. And it kind of just reminds me of victim shaming. It's like, oh, it's your fault. Exactly. Let's focus on why you didn't leave. But that, again, doesn't touch upon why is the abuse happening? Why is it allowing what in this person's mind allows them to think that they can be abusive, and what situations or triggers are surrounding that abuse is really where we tackle domestic violence. We don't tackle domestic violence with the victim, because the victim is there. We tackle it with what is the predecessor to the violence and to the abuse. There's a whole gamut of things that feed into that. My abuser was an alcoholic. And that was really, he would have this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde switch that came on because he, when he was intoxicated. So that was a trigger for him. Now, if he, were sober, it was a completely different person. And that wasn't very frequently, but you know what I'm saying? So just this idea of, let's think about like, why is the abuse happening and what can we do to fix it, sort of thing, I think is important.
And at my clinic, we take that exact approach, because we don't just treat the survivors of domestic violence. We also treat the perpetrators of domestic violence. So we hit both ends. When I started doing services in the field in general, I work with just survivors. But I noticed exactly what you were saying. Sure, we can go and treat this like residue of domestic violence, but we're really not getting at the core and protecting the family as a whole. So it's no way, if you're not treating both parties, to really get to the root cause and kind of reduce some of those numbers and the prevalence of domestic violence. So when I started this clinic, that was my number one objective, is to treat both parties, and that's what we do. So of course we don't treat them together in the same.
I was going to ask you that.
No, we don't.
Do you guys
no,
have
ma'am.
a meeting together? Like,
No.
I couldn't imagine that.
It's nothing like that, but we offer perpetrator services in-house, as well as victim services. So I would never treat the victim and the perpetrator in a room together of the same party, same case, or anything like that. But we're treating the population of both to make sure that we get down to some of those really core issues as to why this cycle of domestic violence just keeps going. It's just over and over and over again. And although they may be out the relationship with that survivor, they take those same behaviors and apply them to another relationship, and then we're starting to damage another person. So that was my main objective, exactly what you were saying.
And I think that's probably like one of the first times I've really heard kind of this concept of, even though I know that organizations look at this and focus on this, but this idea of treating the abuser. And just to be transparent, like as a victim, like my first mindset was not treating, like, let's get him help. I'm just being honest. My first mindset was, or has not been, you know, how can he get better? Because really my mindset has been, okay, I need to get myself better. And I think that's why it's so important for organizations to take that role to say, how can we treat the abuser? How can we deal with that person's issues? Because again, like you said, if she goes to another relationship, that behavior will continue.
They continue on.
So I'm just curious, when you treat an abuser, do you take the same approach as far as that you would like with a victim? When you're treating this person, do you come out and say, these are, you have this issue, let's deal with it? Or do you like trying to navigate to make that person understand they have an issue? How does that work?
Well, it's more complex than that. You start off by where are they in the process? So a lot of people don't even want to acknowledge the fact that they are an abuser, that they have abused someone and they've damaged somebody. And it's not just the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, and what that looks like. So it starts with education, and for them to really understand what they're doing to people. And then you start to work downward and you figure out what's anchored in that. And I've been doing this for like perpetrator services for a few years. And what I've learned, you'll be very, very, very surprised. Some of those same core issues that victims have and survivors have, the perpetrators have the same thing. They have that trauma background. They have those substance abuse issues. They have those attachment and bonding issues that you see in the early childhood, that lack of connection, some of those model behaviors that they saw in those relationships between mom and dad. You see a lot of it. And the victims and survivors, and I use the word, interchangeably, but it's the same exact thing. I like to call them survivors because they made it out or they're making it through the process. But a lot of those issues are the same. Do they manifest differently? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. We have a program called Hope Family Services, which is now located in the Resurrection Project, which is in the Pilsen neighborhood.
Okay.
And we've been treating victims and working with victims or survivors and with perpetrators and their children. For about 18 years.
Oh, wow.
And when we first started dealing with perpetrators, we got some criticism because they thought it was going to be dangerous for the survivors or victims. But actually, it was the women themselves who asked us, please help my husband, my partner. I don't want to lose him. I want him to change.
Oh, wow.
So what we did is we accepted men who were interested in doing something about themselves. So we don't give a certificate for court-mandated abusers or perpetrators. We just take men who want to work on themselves. So that limits our population to a certain extent. But they're all there because they want to be, or because their partners have told them, if you don't get this, I'm out of here. So there is some pressure sometimes, but it's very interesting to see how they do change. Not all of them do, but some of them actually, if they want to change, they can change. They can change. It's hard work, but they can do it.
Yeah, they have to be held accountable, so by somebody in their lives. So the court system or the community, right? And a faith community is a great place because people are so invested in that community and the resources that they can get. And, just as we're talking about some of these issues, I do think that it's important to recognize the population of abusers that ends up getting into services, because for many abusers who have access to a lot of resources, even if they do end up having a charge of domestic violence against them, they're able to plea bargain it down to something lesser, and they don't end up having the same sort of consequences like being referred to partner abuse intervention programs. So the services, that are out there are really reaching a very specific population of abusers, which is, an interesting thing to think about when we look at what are the things that we've learned through our work with abusers. It's still not all abusers.
It's a small fraction.
Right.
But they're getting help. That smaller group is still getting help nonetheless. Hopefully, it makes a difference.
After experiencing, as you mentioned, a lot of trauma. The population that has less access to resources, and so the criminal justice system is able to then hold them accountable in some way. One of the things that I often get asked when people want to know about our programs is, what is our success rate?
I think that's an important question. That's a good question. Yeah.
It's a tricky question because what does somebody really mean by that?
Right.
A lot of times what they mean, we specifically have a shelter program in addition to other programs that we have, including hospital-based intervention and then also community-based services. And we even work with a substance abuse treatment program. So we're in a lot of different areas. But, I think when people ask me that questions, a lot of times they say, they mean how many people, back to that question of how many times it takes for someone to leave and go back to the relationship and then finally leave again, is, how many people do you assist that leave and don't return to their abusers? And it's really important that we explain to people that leaving doesn't equal safety.
That's really important. Say that again.
Leaving does not equal safety. In fact, it could increase danger.
Absolutely.
But the most important part of that is understanding that the goal of our services is to increase safety, not to necessarily assist victims to leave. Yes, if that's what they want to do and if that's what's going to be safe for them, and planning how to do it safely. But regardless of any survivor situation coming and getting into our services, number one principle of our intervention is to increase safety. Second is to respect the autonomy of the adult victim. And then third is to hold the perpetrator accountable, not the victim.
Yeah, I think, wow, that was really eye-opening what you just said, this concept of, because we focus so much on leave. That was just eye-opening for me, this idea of we really need to talk about safety and what safety looks like. I'm going to come back to that. I'm digesting that because that was really like the first time I've actually really heard that, to be honest with you. So I'm digesting that as we talk.
And I would say to broaden the idea of safety beyond physical safety, but emotional safety,
Absolutely.
And the other, economic safety and what those other factors look like, because safety is such a broad, the way that we approach it is multi-layered.
I think we should really appreciate that in the Chicagoland area, we have lots of services. I mean, we have different services represented here on our show, but actually there's centers for victims and perpetrators all over Chicagoland. So I think the important thing for listeners to know is there is help, and you can find it. There are many cities where you can't.
Absolutely.
Smaller cities in the country where there's very limited services. But here we have a lot, and it's all free. You can go and get counseling, you can get shelter, you can get all kinds of accompaniment, legal help, and everything, and it's all free. So I want to urge everybody, if you know somebody who needs some help them find it. And one way to do it, there's a lot of hotlines. The Chicago or the state of Illinois has a hotline. You call that hotline, and they will refer you to the closest service.
Yeah, and there's a national hotline as well. So even what I love about we have a lot of resources. We're lucky in the Chicagoland area, but you don't have to live in the Chicagoland area to access those resources, because realistically, sometimes being in your own neighborhood isn't the safest place to be. So we get people coming from, Texas, from Virginia, from all over the country.
wow.
And so that national hotline is really helpful too. And I actually have that here. If I can read my own handwriting here. It's 1-800-787-3224.
Again,
1-800-787-3224.
And I will say,
that's the TTY number. So
Oh, perfect.
yeah, it's also on my Facebook page and
there we go.
on the website. If you go to pillowtalkpretythings.com, I also have a listing of all of these numbers where you can contact for additional help across the United States, and there's also an international number as well on the website. But I will agree that Chicagoland is very unique in that there are a multitude of resources that you can get. And I think that really it's just getting over your fear of asking for help because of this cloud that's over you as being a victim. And I think it's this idea of I have to ask for help. That means something's wrong. And I think there's something wrong with me and I have to get help. And I think, like, just thinking about my situation, it wasn't something that I wanted to share with anyone. Like, my closest friends had no idea until I came out with this, because I was so guarded, because as a victim, you live two different lives. I lived my life where I have a very, lucrative career. I have children. I have things that I need to do. And then there's this other dark side of my life. So, we just put on this mask. And so by asking for help, we have to take the mask off. And that's very difficult. That's a very difficult first step. But I so appreciate the fact that we have so many resources available to men and women who are abuse victims. I think that's so important. And even for children. So I know eventually I do want to talk about the children piece, because I think that's very important. But was there anyone else that wanted to kind of talk about the resources and how victims can get help through your organizations before we move on to the next question?
I would say, a lot of victims I don't know they're victims. They're living
Absolutely.
in a relationship that's difficult, and they're not sure what's going on, and they're not ready to call themselves victims of domestic violence. So that's okay. That's okay. But you can get help nevertheless. You don't have to wear a label to get help. You can just call and say, I'm having difficulties in my relationship. Can you help me? And these services will help you think through it and figure out what's happening and how you can respond.
And just talk a little bit about, like, the therapeutic process. I get a lot of couples who come in together, of course, and like you were saying, they want to seek the services to help my partner to get help. We do a screening process to make sure that it's a safe environment before we even go through with the couples therapy process, and it's layered. So we have one party, individually, the next week the other party individually, to screen out for this exact thing. So even if they agree to come in as a couple and they are not saying, this is domestic violence, we screen for it to make sure.
Oh, wow, that's great, because again, they may not even know.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And it's about keeping everybody safe,
Absolutely.
not just the people involved in the couple, but also the clinician. We want to make sure the clinician is safe and providing safe services.
Right. And even if you're not a shelter program, there's so many ways to implement training in hospitals, police departments, schools. And so I think really looking at it from a community and systems level too is helpful. A lot of our big push lately has been working with, doing medical advocacy and sending advocates 24/7 to some of our local hospitals, or, really working with our police departments and doing training. So people on the front end are also better able to identify different red flags that we might see.
Awesome. So just to kind of segue into something I wanted to talk about, because we kind of brought it up, but I kind of want to put it out there, is this idea of, we've talked about the victim, we've talked about the abuser, but for those families that have children, and how those children are impacted. I mean, because I've seen it as an educator. I've been a teacher, I've been a principal, and now I'm at district office. But all throughout my career, I have been able to see the signs of children without even screening with ACEs that they have some significant trauma, and the majority of that trauma of the children that I've dealt with, and I've done pre-K through high school, have come from domestic violence homes. And in working with children, you have to be very sensitive, because I've recognized that if I bring it up to mom or dad, whichever one is the victim, that it can actually cause more issues at home than I wish to, bring up. But we see the impact and the residual effects, particularly at the pre-K level, because those children have not been able to navigate how to mask what's happening. So we see at the pre-K level exhibiting layers of violence, exhibiting layers of sexual aggression, because some of violence abuse is sexual between the partner and the abuser. And we see that in younger children, and it's very hard to deal with it because the child, that's all they know, because they've grown up in that. And so we're having to deal with this issue of how do we reconfigure their mindset, their brain, to know that this really isn't functionality, this is dysfunctionality. And that's a struggle. So how do your various organizations work or deal with that very, very sensitive issue? Because it becomes, it's not that it's intrusive, but with children, it's very, very dangerous, because their brains are sponging and they're developing. And we've got kids that are diagnosed with PTSD at 5 years old. We've got kids that are diagnosed with ODD at 5 years old because of the trauma they've experienced. How do you navigate that? How can we help with that? I think that's because these children grow up, they become adults in society, right? And unless their trauma is dealt with at some level, it's going to continue. So how do we deal with that? What do we say about that?
Well, I really appreciate you bringing up that topic. At Between Friends, we have a program that actually works specifically with children 0 to 5.
Oh, wow.
So because it is that
amazing.
pre-verbal time, what you've just touched on is the fact that the earlier that someone is exposed to the trauma, especially when they're pre-verbal, how difficult the development can be and how oftentimes development stops for children at that time. And so we do a program called Child Parent Psychotherapy. We also have a couple other programs, evidence-based pieces that we do with younger children as well, because it is so important to first repair the attachment that happens oftentimes when trauma exists for really young children.
Wow.
So repairing that attachment with the caregiver, the non-abusive caregiver, is essential to that healing and that process. And so that's one of the programs we run, but also because we are in so many schools. So similar, if you imagine that you have one of the most difficult days in your life and a police officers called to your home and all of this uproar is happening, there's a child experiencing that, then is expected to go to school the next day and focus on something.
Right.
And so we all can kind of recognize that, but we also have to recognize that overachiever that is in that classroom is your A student, is somebody who wants to be the best, so nobody looks at home and what's going on at home. And so the importance of just kind of being in our classrooms, and we're in about 50 different schools every year, engaging young people in healthy relationship programming. And we see that. And so we know we're also first responder to help our educators know how to identify those things, and also help our families and our communities going around. And what I oftentimes try to connect in how we do our work is that if a child experiences a positive adult, we always want that to be a caregiver, but it can be an aunt, it could be an uncle, it could be a grandparent, it can be someone in the neighborhood that is somebody who's a positive influence in a child's life. That makes a difference. And so we all can kind of share in that role as well, when that caregiver may not be ready to be able to give that child all they need, and it makes a difference.
So you had mentioned that your program goes into school. Do you guys have a partnership with CPS, or how does that work? If I know I have a lot of principal friends who are watching and listening, if they wanted something like that for their schools, how would they go about getting that partnership?
So we are a CPS vendor. So we are a program that goes into schools. We're also, we're in many schools, but we're with schools for 8 weeks. So this isn't the, we're going to call you in and have an assembly type program. It is really evidence-based in the sense that we're engaging young people for a period of time and really engaging the entire school. So it's also our teachers. It's also our parents in the school. So we have a multi-layered approach. So it's an investment on a school's part.
That's
amazing. And I think if they want to make the investment, we definitely want to make sure that it's available. And we try to also, where we operate a learning collaborative, so many of our partnering agencies have learned how to do this work as well. So if we're not the agency that has a space to take you in, we're definitely going to try to connect you to one of our partners that we know is also doing really excellent work.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think every school is going to be a little different because there are going to be some of those schools who maybe just want, that once a year assembly. But then there are other schools. For example, I know we're in a couple of schools where we have a group every single week, sort of year round. Whether it's, like I said, 8 weeks. And what's great too is for children 12 to 17, they can get up to 8 free sessions before getting parental consent. Because unfortunately, sometimes parents aren't the safest ones to go to.
Right.
And so they have that option as well. And that's, like I said, between ages 12 and 17. And I also know in our program too, we have a therapist who is on site at some of the high schools. So if the school is able to work with us, whether it's during a lunch hour or a study hall, they're able to actually see a therapist at their school, opposed to trying to have to navigate getting a ride and getting services.
So they can go 8 sessions with you. I know with social work it's 5, so they can do 8. That's incredible. That's awesome. Any other thoughts on?
It's so important. I think a lot of domestic violence programs have some component of children's services because so many survivors end up seeking help when they see that their children are being affected. We definitely provide services to children both at our outreach program and at our shelter program. One of the key components of services with children is talking about safety planning as well, and making sure that safety plan is not about making the child responsible for the family's safety, but understanding that children are putting themselves in dangerous situations and a way to try and protect themselves and their family already. And so being able to take them through that process of how can they handle themselves is just really empowering. I think it's really important to be really honest with children.
That's a good point.
I think commenting earlier that there are a lot of services for victims and survivors. There are not a lot of services, I don't think, for children, not as much. And that's very unfortunate because they do need to have a response, just as their mothers or their fathers if they're victims. So that's something we have to learn about and get the resources for in the city of Chicago. Now, the Center for Disease Control is coming out with a curriculum, and between friends here, Yesenia worked on the development of that curriculum. And so that is supposed to come out this fall, they said. Okay, and that's going to be an evidence-based curriculum that they're going to recommend for the entire country. So educators are going to have the opportunity to have something that they can use. But the challenge is going to be, will teachers pick up the baton here? And that's not easy to do because teachers are so overloaded, so limited in resources. How are they going to integrate this new program? But we have to really kind of work to get them to understand this is really important because many of your children sitting right there in their desk before you are coming from homes that are troubled by this.
I totally agree. And I'll let you continue. I just wanted to interject. I think it's so important. And congratulations. I think that's phenomenal, by the way. I think it's important because if we're not reaching children at their core, they're not going to learn anyway. And I think we have, as a country, we have to come to understand this. It's not like, years ago where, kids came and everything was great and we could teach them and they sat in their desks and everybody learned and that was good. Kids now are dealing with so many different things and they can't learn. They can't get the basics because of what they're dealing with before they even come into the classroom. So if we really want intelligent citizens and dedicated citizens, we have to get at the soul. We have to get at the core. And we're failing at that in our schools. I'll be the first person to say it. We're failing at that because our teachers aren't trained to do that. That's not taught in teacher ed programs. Not every district has an MTSS program or a trauma-informed program. And we really have to get it at the nuts and bolts of working with children, particularly that are coming from DV homes or trauma homes, because we're never going to be able to reach them. Never. We just won't.
Yeah, I think, too, one of the things that is not commonly recognized is how much street violence has its roots in domestic violence. And I think all of us who work in this know that there's definitely a connection. And agencies that work with street violence, they know that many of the perpetrators of street violence come from homes where they learned it at home.
That's an excellent
And
point.
unfortunately, that's something that the city of Chicago, as an institution, or we could say, has not totally fully grasped.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, it's not just police that's going to solve this problem.
Right.
It's getting homes to be healthier, peaceful, producing peaceful, loving children.
Mhm.
That's what we have to work on.
Mhm. It's an excellent point.
And just to jump in, my clinic doesn't go as far back, but we connect with other service providers. So when I get a parent who calls in or they're seeking services at the clinic, and I see the need for a child to be connected with services, that's something that we take on for them. So I don't just send a parent out and say, hey, go find a service. We sit down, we make a list. If they want us to make the phone call with them, we make the phone call with them. As a call to action, just something that I did for myself, like this year, I actually wrote this book about how children are affected by domestic violence. So it talks about the psychological, the cognitive, the emotional, the behavioral changes that these children experience as they go through this process, because nobody understands it.
Mhm.
And like you were speaking to, these very, very, very young children, this starts back in birth.
Mhm.
Although
In utero, absolutely.
these children don't have the cognitive capacity and the language abilities to express exactly what's going on, they're feeling everything. They're feeling everything, and it's just ingrained in their cognitive functions as they grow and develop, and it's horrible. It's horrible. So I made this book for people to understand, and not just parents, but the teachers, the social workers, and counselors, to use this as a tool to have this conversation with not only the parent but the children as well, because they need to understand what's going on with them. These are the children who are misdiagnosed, like you were saying, and a big one is ADHD.
Oh,
Those
absolutely.
trauma responses
Misdiagnoses.
come up like ADHD all the time.
Mhm.
This kid is acting out. He's ADHD, but that may not be the issue if you don't really get to the root of what's going on. So yeah, that's my call of action. Just something to add to the community, to put something out and say, hey, let's think about this. Although we don't service them, I want to make sure that I still connect them with providers who do so.
What's the name of the book?
Oh, When Mommy and Daddy Fight.
When Mommy Did. Okay, thank you. Did anybody else want to chime in as far as just how we're dealing with children in abusive homes and what we as a community can do? I know you guys have talked a lot about, like, the curriculum is very important, the programming, the services. And I think, like, just with dealing with children in general, the goal, and I'm going to segue into something else, I think the goal is so important to make sure that we stop the behaviors. And I think one of the things you had brought up was the teen dating violence component. I kind of wanted to segment to that, if we could, just for a second, because one of the things that as I've delved more into other situations of domestic violence, not related to mine, but in general, and thinking about my high school students that I've had in the past, a lot of them don't understand that what they're doing is actually dating violence. And what's interesting is I've seen it a lot more with the girls perpetrating than with the boys, because they'll slap or they'll hit, not realizing that this is all a part of teen dating violence as well. And I think it's important, if you have a teen or you work with teens, that you understand and kind of recognize, like, what teen dating violence is and how dangerous it is. And I see it a lot also in our teen LGBTQ community as well. I actually see it more in that community than I do in any other. And so how do we face, or how do we deal with when our kids are older, when they're teenagers? What kind of services how can we help our teenagers in understanding, because now they're developing these skills? What can we do about that? So kind of talk about, just if teens are listening, what does teen dating violence look like? What does that actually mean? And how do I know as a teenager, oh, this is not right? Because a lot of times they don't know. I've worked with the Washington Women's Foundation, and I've spoken at an event there, and I worked with teens, and they really didn't understand that what they were going through was teen dating violence until we had that seminar, and they kind of sat back and said, oh my God, if there's a young lady in Dayton, Ohio, where I went to school, I'm sure you are aware of the case. Her 28-year-old boyfriend just killed her. And when you go on her Facebook page, you see how she talks about it's not cool to hang out with a guy who's abusive. Like, if you go through her Facebook page, you can see all these comments that she makes about how he's abusive and stalking her and that sort of thing. And just a few days later, he kills her.
Mhm.
It's uncanny to just go through her Facebook feed and kind of see how it progressed. And she was 17 and now she's dead. But it's like along the way, like when you look at the comments, like some people will make laughing comments because they don't understand. They think it's funny. Like as a teen, it's funny. Oh, it's cool. Like you're ride or die for your man. Like it's cool. No, that's not cool. Like that's not what's up. And so kind of like, can we talk about that? Just to have a general dialogue just about this idea of teen dating violence and what teens should be looking for and what are the signs that says, hey, no, this is not cool. Because when I think back to my situation, my ex-husband, there were signs when we were teenagers because we were together since junior year in high school. There were very clear signs. But had I recognized, because I didn't grow up in a DV home. I grew up in a 2-parent, white picket fence, 2 dogs, a house, and a fish home type of thing. So my life was perfect. So I'm just a unique case. I didn't have trauma and all that stuff until I, got with him. But like, what are things that teenagers should be looking for to kind of say, hey, I don't think this is really the person for me?
Sure. So I think whether it's looking at violence or looking at domestic violence, it's looking at, is this linked back to a power and control issue? Like there are so many different tactics that are used in abusive and unhealthy relationships. So I'd say, kind of stop and look like, okay, is this person doing something because they're looking at the equality and well-being of our relationship, or are they doing this to exert control over me? Like, do they not want you hanging out with that friend because they're trying to control you, or they like, what are some, is it like, oh, wearing that? And I think another big piece too, especially that we're seeing looking back at teens, is this increase in digital abuse.
So important.
Right. Technology is one of those things where like, it's great in making things convenient, but it's also really great in helping people keep tabs on people, or looking at like trying to get access to your social media pages, or revenge porn has really increased throughout the years. And so I think digital abuse is a huge one to look for, especially with teens.
Wow.
I think you touched on so many different things, and even in your explanation, I have to say I was really just in awe of all the things that you were sharing, because there were so many different directions for it. And one of the things that came into my mind as you were talking is that the reason why we actually started the REACH program, which is our teen dating violence prevention program, was because what we were seeing within our counseling work was a lot of these relationships that people were coming in about with abuse dated back to high school, dated back to their younger grades. And, what we know is that from ages 16 to 24 are the highest risk for young women to experience physical and sexual violence in a relationship. And so we know that is that time that is the most vulnerable for experiencing it. So we need to kind of take it back a little bit to figure out, okay, well, what leads into that? And I think Laurel did a great job of just talking about some of the early warning signs. One of the ones we oftentimes talk about as well is when you start looking at jealousy can be something that happens very often in relationships. And then, so that can be something that occurs. It's a feeling, it's natural, it happens. When you have the point that the way that somebody expresses is one where it's extreme jealousy, it is a point of possessiveness where it's isolating you from being able to do the things that you one time enjoyed to do. And it's restricting that. When that's the source of where that jealousy is coming from, it's not from love. And oftentimes we confuse the two.
Right.
It's not because someone cares about you that they're jealous. It's their own insecurity that is manifesting itself in that way. And it has a lot more to do with them than you. And what ends up happening is oftentimes we confuse those two. So that's usually one of the first ones we try to separate. Anger and, the cause as the source of violence, it is an issue of power and control. And it is that more so than anything.
I think that's so important that you say that, because I just thinking back in my teenage mind, he's jealous. He's wondering where I am. It's because he loves me so much. And the abuser will say that, oh, I'm only doing this because I love you. Oh, I'm only doing this because I care about you. But it's just so sick and twisted. And we just don't have enough dialogue about that so that teenagers understand that's not what love is, that sort of concept.
How every relationship has breakups. Yeah. So I think, how does somebody handle trying to break up, especially early on in dating relationships? You see that a lot more frequently. And something to really be very mindful of is if somebody gives these kind of messages like, I'm lost without you. Stuff that starts to sound like, I don't know what I'm going to do. If you ever leave me, I might have to kill myself. They might those are huge, huge warning signs. And, really an indicator that it's something really serious and very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. Any other thoughts on that before we kind of segue into one last thing I wanted to talk about?
Sure. I think just one final thought. I know Yesenia was talking about a lot of times we hear sort of this confusion of like anger versus power and control. So you'll hear like, oh, just take an anger management class, or oh, I just have anger issues. I have problems controlling my anger.
It doesn't work, right?
No.
The doctor is like, no, that's not quite it.
And I'm a certified anger management specialist, and I get it all the time. People call, and I'm like, well, tell me what's really going on. And they're like, well, and I'm like, no, that's domestic violence. Like, you're not coming to anger management for that.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. Sorry.
No. It's good credibility.
It's official.
No, but I would agree absolutely, because I think we see where it's like this person, like, are they lashing out at the mailman? Are they lashing out at their boss? But no, it seems like very often it's that pattern is they're lashing out at their intended victim.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can control who you lose control around, it's not an anger issue, it's a power and control issue.
And we go over that in detail in perpetrator services, that exact thing, because it's not globally, it's to a very specific situation.
Selective anger.
Exactly.
That's a good point. I like that, selective anger, right?
And the anger, like air quotes anger,
Right.
that they
Yeah.
express that they had towards their boss or somebody else is used as an excuse
Mhm.
Right.
against the victim.
That's an
right?
excellent point.
And it
Excellent
doesn't
point.
go to the level where they're hitting them or lashing out at them or throwing them through a wall or whatever. It
Right.
doesn't go to that extreme. So it's like, that's not the same thing, buddy. Nice try.
Yeah, it's my boss was a jerk to me today, so that's why I'm getting angry at you now when I'm at home.
Oh, misplaced
anger,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, it's an
That's a
excuse.
good point, right?
And I
go
do
ahead.
say, I do think it's important for people that that's oftentimes what they think the source is. And I think as providers, it is really upon us to really kind of help expand some of that and engage people into this work to create the change that we're looking for with people.
Gosh, time goes by so fast. You guys are really giving a lot of really, really important information. I do want to ask one last question because I know I get this all the time, and I have people that reach out to me in my inbox just because they know, the work that I'm trying to do. How do people help victims that are currently in their situation? And one of the things I always say is you can't force someone to leave.
No.
But how do friends of victims, how do family members of victims help them in their situation? What are your thoughts on that? And what are some of the things that they can do to get to this issue of safety? Not necessarily the leaving piece, but to be safe. And then also for themselves to be safe. Because I know sometimes when people interject themselves into domestic violence situations, it actually ends up hurting them, or they end up the ones being killed and that sort of thing. So how can people who are not the victim, who love the victim, who even love the abuser, how can they help? What should they be doing in that situation?
They can help. They can definitely help. And what I always encourage friends of survivors to do is be the listening ear and not necessarily try to step in and be a provider or somebody who's trained in domestic violence services. It's a very dangerous field. Everybody knows that.
Say that one more time. It's very dangerous.
Very dangerous field. So, I don't want people to take that on for themselves. We're trained to do this. So the best thing to do is if you know that your friend or family member is involved in a situation, you can seek the same exact services that they're seeking.
Excellent point.
You can call a provider and say, my friend is involved in this. How can I support them? And let a professional guide you helping your friend, because you don't want to tell them to leave, because it gives this false sense of security that, oh, my friend's going to protect me if I leave, and you're putting yourself in danger as well as your friend. So I wouldn't go that far, but I would say seek the services, the same exact services. I get people call me all the time who my friend is involved in something, my family member is involved in something, and I have them come in and I service them on their thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are associated with the situation, because they have them and they're valid. They're scared just like the survivors are. And we need to make sure that we acknowledge that as providers, not just these two people are involved in a situation or the kids, it's the family as a whole, the family system, the support system that is really affected by domestic violence.
Excellent point.
Yeah, absolutely. Following up on that, I think when people, I get that question a lot, like, how can I support survivors? And I would just say, listen, support, and believe. I think that's just a huge component.
So important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's you tell your story over and over again to somebody, and if you're not being believed, you're just feeling completely invalidated. So you don't have to be a domestic violence expert to just believe somebody or to say, hey, I know you're going through this. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but when you're ready, let me know how I can help you.
Good point.
Yeah, I think there's different strategies with different people. What it is that affects the survivor more than anything else. Like maybe she's most concerned about her children. So to ask her about how are your children handling all this, and have her reflect on it, and so that's one of the ways. But another way is to just ask, how are you feeling, and would you like to feel differently? Would you like to feel peaceful and so forth? And so then how would you go about getting that? How would you start feeling peaceful? Well, you have to get some help,
I like that.
So I think encouraging them in a way, but listening is very important, not judging them, not telling them what they have to do, but saying, I'm sorry for what you're going through. I just think it's terrible. You don't deserve it. And I just want to be there forever. And make sure that the victim has the information she needs. If she gets the inclination to act, she'll have the number right there to call.
You really can't underestimate the importance of saying things like, it's not your fault. A lot of times people feel like, I said it once, this person has been told constantly that it is their fault by the abuser, but also by others in their life. And so you being the one person possibly in their life that is saying it's not your fault, you're going to have to say it several times, more than several times, actually. And then the other thing is, while you're listening, not being the contrary person, not using that but word, not trying to get them to focus on all of the negative things about the abuser. You don't want to put them in the situation where they are one more time having to defend themselves. When they talk about their ambivalent feelings, I'm going through a lot. At the same time, there are these wonderful things about this person that I really love, and they do wonderful things sometimes. Other times they do horrible things. Really let them to talk about those ambivalent feelings on both sides of it, and don't interrupt them. If you start saying but let's talk about the bad things, they're going to even more keep going to trying to defend that person. They're already doing that all the time.
Excellent point. So as we close, because we're running down to 3 minutes, I do want you guys to say the name of your organization, your practice, and your phone number. If people are listening and they want to reach out, I want to give you that opportunity to do that now before we close, because I don't want people to be like, oh, how do I get in touch with, the doctor? How do I get in touch with my teen friends? Or how do I get in touch with Father Dom? So if you could just kind of quickly do that, and then we'll close out.
The name of my organization is Family First Domestic and Family Counseling Clinic. We're located at 8543 South Stony Island in Chicago, Illinois. Phone number is 773-595-5794.
Our organization is Pillars Community Health, Constance Morris House. Our hotline number is 708-485-5254. We primarily serve Proviso and Lyons Township, but really you can give us a call from anywhere.
Yesenia Maldonado, Between Friends, 1-800-603-4357. And for any teens out there, I'll direct them to our website, especially for them, www.reach4friends.org.
Megan Rosado, and again, I'll point out that Connections for Abused Women and Their Children, we're on social media, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you can find us there. Our hotline number is 773-278-4566. And also I want to make it clear that we do serve survivors of all gender identities. Just point, our name is
Very
Connections for Abused Women and Their Children.
So one of the major things that I'm doing is trying to get churches to respond to domestic violence so that everybody knows that their faith community understands and they can always go there for help. So we are called the Domestic Violence Outreach. You can be www.domesticviolenceoutreach. And my number is 312-371-7752.
Okay. I really appreciate you guys coming out because I know you don't know me. I'm just some random person who emailed you. So I really appreciate taking the time out of your busy schedules because I know they're very busy to come out and to share. And I really do appreciate on behalf of all survivors, the work that you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.